Cybersecurity and zero trust security in particular depend increasingly on establishing granular control over who is on your network, their role, and their privileges. For government agencies, that also means deploying more effective ways to protect users from having their passwords and credentials compromised. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and here to share some of their insights on this is Robert Roser, Chief Information Security Officer at the Idaho National Lab, a part of the Department of Energy. Rob, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Wyatt.
So let me start first by asking, how would you say the White House executive order on cybersecurity to modernize and push toward zero trust is likely to reshape government IT security strategies?
Well, I guess I would start with the following. It's just because it's an executive order doesn't mean it's a bad idea, right? From a national lab perspective, those aspects in the executive order that apply to us really make good common sense, right? Who can argue with zero trust, multi-factor authentication, improving your cloud stance with respect to cyber and data encryption? So the public-private data sharing component of the executive order is much harder and will require a trust that doesn't exist, but that's not something that we're worrying about it. The requirements, at least for DOE, as I understand it, in terms of what's needed to satisfy the executive order, are still being shaped. So we're not really paying close attention to that per se, but many of those elements that I read about were already started in terms of executing things. And so we're still continuing on our path.
Well, that's encouraging to hear. Next, let me ask a little about how is the government's willingness to allow employees to work remotely likely to alter how agencies, and maybe your agency, how they need to approach identity and multi-factor authentication?
Right. So first of all, as Idaho National Lab, we're not government employees per se, right? We're contractors to the Department of Energy. We had multi-factor authentication in place well in advance of the pandemic. So our situation is we use HSPD-12 badges as part of our multi-factor. The challenge in terms of the pandemic has been that when we hire new employees, it's not always easy to get them HSPD-12 badges and get those credentials cached. So in those cases, we're having to allow for exceptions, if you will, until we can get them the cards and the caching that's required in order to take full advantage of it.
Well, I suspect you're not alone in that situation, but thank you for clarifying that. Next, what can government agencies do to move toward a more, let's call it a human-centric cybersecurity model, to better equip employees and contractors to deal with the growing threat of ransomware and phishing attacks?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We at INL do monthly phishing drills with our employees, right? And we also require quarterly training of all staff on cybersecurity. These days, I would say what we're doing is we take actual phishes that we get, real ones, and then turn them around and use that concept to try to spoof our employees. They're hard. We make these spoof emails quite challenging for people to identify because they are actual ones that are employed in the wild. At the moment, I would say our click rate is somewhere between 3% and 5%, which is not bad, but we need to get better than that, because as you say, phishing is probably the single way in for this ransomware attacks.
Absolutely. And then maybe lastly, what steps should be taken to help government employees create and manage their passwords more effectively?
Yeah, so that's a good one, and probably the hardest question you've asked me so far. I would say we've been slow at INL to moving away from passwords per se. We currently require multi-factor authentication to log into your endpoint, whether it be a workstation or whether it be a laptop. That requires you to have an HSPD-12 card, as I said. That's something you own, and an 8-digit PIN, which is something you know, to authenticate. most of our applications then are effectively single sign-on, and so we give people access to that based on your ability to log into that machine. We have not started the process really of looking at biometrics or other types of things to try to eliminate passwords altogether. I mean, that's both a technology shift as well a cultural shift to get people to think outside of the traditional password approach that we've had. We do offer. We recognize that there are a lot of passwords that people have to deal with on a daily, weekly basis. So we do have a tool out there where employees can store their passwords and retrieve them so that once they set a good password or they don't have to remember it, the tool will do it for them, and it stays in a completely encrypted environment. So that's where we're at. I'd like to get better there. As you point out, right? Passwords are probably the single easiest way to get in. Most people don't have secure passwords, and it's really an antiquated approach.
Well, and as I think you noted, a lot of times it's more of a cultural issue than a technical issue. So,
Agreed.
but wish you luck with that, as we do with others. Well, Robert Roser, thank you so much for just taking a few minutes to share some of your perspectives on what the Idaho National Lab is doing in the way of improving security with its employees and its various agencies.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.